Hello and welcome to Africa and our contribution to the WOW Global 24 Festival. My name is Lola Shuneng and I am the director of the Awhatorhe Book Festival, which takes place in Nigeria. We are delighted to be partnering with the WOW Foundation to bring you these urgent and very important conversations with contributors from across our continent. So you'll be listening to feminist giants like Bisi Adeleye, Jessica Horn, Leyla Hussein, and Kinna Likimani from Ghana. You'll also get to listen to some of our fabulous poets. So Wana Udobang will be with us performing, as well as Lebo Mashile from South Africa, and of course, Ola Elhassan. Last but not least, we've got some music for you. And we picked Temi of us especially because she is so loved by the Awhatorhe Book Festival team. And we decided that we wanted to share her with the rest of the world. Please get involved with the WOW Global 24 Festival conversations on social media using the hashtag WowGlobal24. We'll see you soon. Coming up first is a panel discussion.
Fantastic. So, the topic is killing the culture of sexual and gender-based violence, which everyone knows that gender-based violence and sexual violence is a problem across Africa. The numbers are ridiculous. And I was reading just before this panel, and I think WHO says 1 in 3 women would have experienced either physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. That's a lot of women. And because of the coronavirus restrictions across the continent, it's even crazier. So people are stuck with their abusers, whether it's strangers or their fathers, whatever, they're at home, they can't, get out. And so the numbers are even worse off compared to before. I read in Uganda, in South Africa, we're starting a hashtag or every other day in South Africa, in Nigeria, same thing. So this conversation is to figure out how we can kill this culture of sexual and gender-based violence. What can we do to put an end to it? It seems like women have been talking about this problem forever. And I'm so excited to have these panelists here with me who are very competent, and we can sort of look into this conversation and figure out how we can really minimize sexual and gender-based violence. Damilola is on this panel, I believe. I don't know, Damilola, do you want to introduce yourself, or do you want me to do it for you very quickly so that we can get into the conversation, whichever one you prefer? What do you say?
Help.
What did you say?
Please help with the introduction. Please help.
Okay, I'll just do very short intro. So Damilola is a designer. She's a double degree holder, and she's also the founder of Market Match. So Market Match is a movement in Nigeria which is really focused on speaking against sexual harassment in the markets, which is a thing. Sexual harassment happens everywhere. So that's for Damilola. Then we have Essay. Essay, I don't know how to pronounce your surname. I'm so sorry. Please correct me. No, can you just say how to pronounce? Awhatorhe, okay, fantastic. Yes. So Essay is a human rights activist. She's a member of Nigeria's, I think, Sex Workers Association. She's a friend of Feminist, as you described yourself. And you're a very vocal voice when it comes to talking about sexual violations on the continent. And then with Zethu, I think Matebeni, please again correct me if I'm wrong. Zethu is a sociology professor at the West University. She's her voice is very, very vocal when it comes to the inclusion of queer people and people of different gender identities in African society, which you know is a huge problem even today. And so obviously these women are fantastic women, and we're a formidable panel to talk about this issue. If everyone's okay with the introduction, I'm just going to go straight to the questions because it's a lot to talk about. I'm going to start with you, Dami. Is it okay if I call you Dami?
Yes, sure.
Fantastic. So first question, over the past few months, we've seen a lot of things happening in terms of women speaking out against sexual and gender-based violence. There have been protests, there have been hashtags. In fact, in Nigeria, the police was forced to release a statement saying, okay, we have a crisis on our hands, and as long as I've existed, this is the thing that has never happened. The police has never come out to say, okay, you know what, we need help, this is bad. So do you believe that based on all of these things that are happening, that we have come to a point where change is actually going to happen just because of how many people are now speaking up against it? What are your thoughts on that?
I honestly don't necessarily think that this would cause any drastic change, but what I think this would do would be kind of like the introduction towards change. I think for too long in Nigeria, sexual violence has been something that has been cultural. I know people don't like to admit it, but it is what it is. It has been very cultural, and it's something that a lot of people know to be bad, but seem to either feel powerless against or seem comfortable with the idea of that bad existing. So that has been the issue. The average woman in Nigeria, on average, has had some form of sexual violation experience where she has either been harassed or even abused and raped. So these are the kinds of realities that women in Nigeria face. However, these acts are not perpetrated by ghosts. They're done by the people we live with, mostly men. Does happen to men as well, where women are also the perpetrators, but we know that by far the number of perpetrators is mostly men. And I think that the very patriarchal culture in Nigeria makes it a situation where we don't talk about it. So all of the happenings now and all of the music happening from this, this is very important because it's putting it into our consciousness that not only is this bad, there is a new conversation around how we can remove this bad. That feeling of hopelessness, even though we still feel it, is getting to a point where we can see it as an issue that people are on and are capable of addressing. But there have always been people who have walked against sexual violence in Nigeria. That's been happening for a very long time. But what we're seeing now is a change in consciousness. It's not just a women's issue. It's an issue where everybody feels a need to say something. Celebrities, politicians, is now something that has been sung in our consciousness that we have to do something about, which is the very first step towards change.
Right. Generally, there's just a lot more conversations around it. People are tired. That makes sense. Essay, let me come to you quickly. I saw a banner, a placard during one of the protests, where people were speaking against sexual and gender-based violence. And it was very interesting because it read something along the lines, I can't remember the exact words, I'm paraphrasing. It was something like, don't rape women, that's why we have sex workers. And I thought that was very, fascinating because it just struck me that people think that the alternative to sexual violence is going for sex workers. It feels like, oh, okay, well, we can't rape women, let's just go and rape sex workers instead. And that was very, very, very fascinating to me because the process was just so odd. I want to know, what are your thoughts on how sex workers are treated across the continent, not just in Nigeria now? It seems like they're looked upon as alternatives to be abused. And how can we put an end to that process?
So in Nigeria, many people think sex workers don't have human rights. Sex workers are not supposed to even live. Sex workers should be abused every time because they are not supposed to be doing sex work. That is the common man on the street in Nigeria. That's for any war. That is what they feel. They feel they can be assaulted, they can be dealt with, and nobody will come for them. But the truth is that they have human rights. Their body is their business. They have a life to live. They have kids. They have families. They have their aunties, their girlfriends, to responsible persons in society too. And it has been on and on and on for ages, where even the police, even their clients, they assault sex workers, which is not supposed to be so because they have their own human rights. And recently, change has come to sex workers because we now have human rights lawyers who will stand for them, human rights lawyers who come out and speak and say, no, these are human beings as well. They have their own rights. They are citizens of this country. So we don't just treat them like this. And it has really worked for us. Even taking cases up to Human Rights Commission in Nigeria. We've had lawyers that have stood for sex workers and their cases were won. And you know, like the first speaker talked about change. And what is bringing about this change? Advocacy. People coming out to speak out. I can remember far back in the days, women can't even come out and speak. But these days, women come out and go placards. Women come out and speak in the public and tell you, no, this should stop. It's a society where women should be respected, no matter the kind of job she's doing, no matter her status, women should be respected. And we'll talk about change. And I'm so happy in the media, we saw a lot of placards, even sex workers coming out holding placards. There was a scenario in Abuja where sex workers were violated, and they took to the streets and went to the government and said, no, this cannot be happening. And something was done. You know, and the police that were caught at that act were summoned and they were brought to book. So I think change is the watchword, and we'll get there someday. Thank you.
Did you think sex work should be legalized? Do you think that's going to help to stop the abuse on sex workers?
Sex work legalization is not just a day thing. Like I told you, we've been doing a lot of advocacy to the media. We've been doing a lot of advocacy to the police. Most of the time we do some programs where we key in. The programs are just for the media, because sometimes the way the media will paint those cases, I tell you, nobody will want to buy it. It's horrible. And sometimes most of the police too don't know what to do. They are even the ones that assault sex workers even before the public. So we have a lot of sensitization meetings where we train. We have a 4-day symposium, a week symposium, where we invite both the media and the general public to see what actually these people do. We don't preach for them to continue sex work, but we preach for them to know their human rights, that they have rights as well, that they should not be violated. So the process of legalizing sex work is not just a one-day thing. It's a gradual process, and I know we will get there. So for now, we have a lot of programs where we key in stakeholders. We even invite the Human Rights Commission to come. We invite media houses. We invite police, both the foot soldiers of the police and the hierarchy police to come to our programs, and it has worked for us.
Fantastic. Okay, I love your response. Very, very comprehensive. Zethu, let me just go to you now. During the coronavirus restrictions, we know that many women, have been stuck with their visas, with no choice, little transportation, and similarly, members of the LGBT community are also stuck with abusers. Some are family members who violate. We know how Africans perceive members of the LGBT community. It's still a fight that is going on, even in 2020, sadly. How can we bring light to this, the plight of some of these members, the same way we're doing with women? How can we protect members of the LGBT community, especially during this coronavirus pandemic, as cases of abuse are, keep increasing? What can we do?
Okay, thank you, Aisha. Hello, everybody. So thank you for this opportunity. But before I respond to the question, I must say that I found the titling of the panel quite surprising, to use the term "killing the culture," and I say that because as LGBT people in the continent, as sex workers, especially in South Africa, we are always on a daily basis engaging with either the state that is killing us or family members who are killing us. So the response that we are invited to also kill the culture is quite a difficult one to engage with. So I'll just put it out there, and just as a kind of to problematize the kind of framing of the conversation. But to get to your question, I must say that especially in the South African context, but in many other parts of the continent also, many queer people or many LGBT people, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, intersex people have always been victims and sometimes survivors of all forms of violence, whether it is hate crime, it is sexual violence, and murder. And a lot of this is done already by family members, mostly by family members and other members of the community. So to say that COVID-19 has brought a different element is really to undermine some of the struggles that we have been facing as LGBT people in the continent, because we've been mutilated by our own family members, whether there was COVID or not. So we've been chased away from our homes outside COVID-19. Yes, the pandemic has had severe consequences for marginalized people, because many people have found themselves homeless because they've been chased away from their homes. And so they have to survive not in the streets, but elsewhere. So finding alternative places to stay, finding ways of sustaining themselves have been very difficult during this pandemic. In terms of sexual violence, as I said, many people know, for example, South Africa is one of the most, has the highest rates of sexual violence in the world. And we have campaigned for many years to end sexual violence towards LGBT people, particularly Black lesbian women. In South Africa, a Black lesbian woman has become synonymous with the term corrective rape, which of course I don't like to use for reasons I can explore later. And of course, this rape is done by members of society, and sometimes always used by family members to change the sexuality or even the gender identity of that person in the home. So, the home, being at home has always been a problem, and it's not a moment of COVID-19. It's always been a problem, because homes have always been violent spaces and volatile spaces for LGBT people.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. And the reason why I said earlier that the numbers are even higher in terms of COVID-19 is because there have been so many reports saying that people are now forced to stay. There's no option. There's no, I'm going to get out of the house for a few days from my abusive family who is not in support of my sexual identity. It's now I'm stuck with these people, which is really, the numbers are really crazy. In Nigeria, there was a report. There's also reports in South Africa as well. So how can we, is it awareness? Is it sensitization? How can we really get to the bottom of it to include members of the LGBT community in the African society? Because the way it is right now, a lot of people do not have the conversation. And if we can't speak about it, I don't know what the steps and yes, what are the first baby steps?
Well, this is a step. This is a step to have this conversation, to include LGBT voices. If in Nigeria you are able to have a conversation around sex workers, it is also possible to also have a conversation around LGBT people. In some cases, we know, even in our continent, it's very difficult to even talk about women as citizens and as humans. And so, we in any possibility, in any possible space, we have to try and raise the conversation and raise the terms and say, sex workers are also women. Women are also lesbian. Trans women are women. And so we're finding commonalities and also trying to find a common struggle, because we are all facing, whether we call it the enemy or the system or the structures, but we are all facing the same thing. And it is possible to have a joint conversation around the intersecting struggles that we are all facing in society.
Fantastic. That makes a lot of sense. Dami, let me go to you, because you did Market March in Nigeria, and essentially what you were doing was educating people in markets on why they cannot sexually harass women. So I want to know what role you think, based on your experience, what role you think education, especially in terms of including sex education into the Nigerian curriculum, into the African curriculum. I know it has already been done in some countries, although not at the full scale. But in terms of having that conversation, including it into our education system, what do you think that is going to, really, since we're talking about ending sexual and gender-based violence, do you think that's going to go a long way into educating people on the dangers of violence against women and minority communities in general?
Absolutely, yes. I think that one of the biggest issues that we face is the idea that people not necessarily don't know what these things are. Like when we talk about consent, when we talk about what harassment is, the truth is that at the end of the day, we can't tell that they know. But what we don't have is a system where it's inexcusable. And people can hide under ignorance, people can hide under a lack of awareness to continue these acts of violence. And I think that foremost, if we have a structure in our education system, most Nigerians, when we talk about sex education, is about if a boy touches you, get pregnant. So it's usually something very simplistic and ineffective. Building the conversation around not just what sex can be, but the healthy ways that people can have sexual relations, respect for boundaries. I think a lot of women in Nigeria are very unaware of even what the boundaries can be for them. I saw a tweet online of a woman who said that she had been, her husband had been pretty much forcing her to have sex, quote unquote have sex, but she was like, so do we now call that rape? Wouldn't she be wicked if she tagged her husband a rapist for this? That lack, but I couldn't say anything because it's important not to label people's experiences before they themselves do. But that's the reality, that even women, for instance, don't understand the boundaries, and in all of the various patriarchal institutions that we have in Nigeria, whether it's religion, whether it's marriage, there's a general reinforcement on the idea that women, for instance, are property. Women are there to be consumed. And I think that that's the major issue, education. Not because people don't know it's bad, because that would be a lie. I think people are generally, human beings have a conscience. I think the foremost issue is where it's inexcusable. If it's something that is repeated consciously over and over and over again, in school, in church, everywhere, at work, in the market, people become very aware of the acts, not because they never knew before, but because there's a common knowledge, a common agreement to avoid doing this. So absolutely, we do need sex education, especially regarding healthy ways to interact sexually with one another.
That's fantastic. Essay to you now, still on the ways that we can minimize or completely eradicate sexual and gender-based violence. What role do you think the government, whether it's in terms of policy, law enforcement, what role should they play? Because on paper it's very clear. I mean, the role of the police when someone goes to report gender-based violence, it's clear. But then what we have in reality is for example, in Nigeria, it's completely different, where it is the law enforcement agents who are in turn harassing women. So how can we overhaul that system so that law enforcement and policy is now the one killing, okay, for the lack of a better word, killing violence on the continent?
So you just said it. The law enforcement agents need to be educated, mostly the foot soldiers. When I mean the foot soldiers, I mean the ones that go on the road, the ones that go on the field, that goes about arresting people illegally. The government need to look into that. And how can this be solved? It starts from the government as well. Because if the police, the law enforcement agents who are supposed to keep law and order are the ones now assaulting women and assaulting sex workers. Then we're not getting it. It's going to take a very long time. So it still boils down to the government. A lot of advocacy needs to be done. Most of those policemen need to have human rights education as well. They know, because if, for example, let me use Lagos as a scenario. They have human rights text, but they don't have it in all their police stations. There needs to be a human rights text in every police station where policemen are trained. So when cases like that come, they have policemen that will handle those cases. They need to be trained. They need to know actually what is their right, first of all, and how to dish it out to the public. If we can capture that sector, I think we'll get there.
What about in terms of policy? Like what kind of bills?
Like in terms of policies, some states already have it in place. If a woman gets raped, this is what that will be done to her. It's not all the states that have implemented it, and it's not just. They need to have, a secular law that will capture every state, and all the laws will be the same thing. So that what is happening in this state, when you break the law, will be what's happening in this state, will be what is happening in this state. I think a general policy for violence and rape will also go a long way to solve this problem of gender-based violence.
Right. It looks like from the conversation, it looks like a lot of it still goes back to just having conversations, whether it's with law enforcement or family members or the society at large. So it really is dawning on me, I mean, again and again, that we still have a long way to go. So let me ask you, it's depressing. Zethu, let me ask you, I mean, you're a sociology professor, so human interactions, like you study this for a living, this is what you do. What kind of society do you think needs to exist for women and minorities to be protected from all forms of abuse? I don't know if I put that question well. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, Aisha, it makes sense. It makes sense, but you know, there is no society where there's no power dynamics.
Right.
You know, and power manifests in different ways. You know, because many women find themselves in relations with men. Men exert power through different things such as rape or other forms of sexual violence, intimidation, etc. So in terms of a society, I mean, I think as much as we would, in my own, you know, radical and separatist Black lesbian space, it would be to move away from places where women always have to engage with power with men. But of course, that's not always possible, right? And we wouldn't expect that to be an alternative for everybody. But I think it is about time. I mean, the question for me is an interesting one, because it is what we've seen in society is that many of the options that exist, whether it is using a gender-based violence act, or Sexual Offences Act, or I mean, in South Africa we also have the Hate Crimes Act, etc. All these things always ask for the woman to do more than what has already been done to her. So for me, it's like these are not viable options. They're not viable options because they will always make us, or they leave us in a place where there is actually no option. Through the Sexual Offences Act, which is implemented now in many different countries, it is still the woman who has to go and find an alternative shelter, leave her home, sometimes take away her children. It is still the woman who has to be investigated to show evidence in her body that she has been violated. It is still the woman who, she also gets cross-questioned if she goes to court, actually, if she's crazy enough to go to court. And I say crazy because we've seen you have to be crazy to go to court, because there everything works out for the perpetrator. So even the system, what I call the criminal system, which only offers justice to the perpetrator, actually does absolutely very little or nothing for women as victims. So in creating a different society, I think women have to now rise up and figure out alternatives to their own ways of being, their own ways of wanting to exist without always having to negotiate power that kills. Because it's not that we don't want to negotiate with power. We do. We want to negotiate with power, but you don't want to negotiate with power that kills. And unfortunately, it is a power that always kills us as women, and it kills children, our own children. So I think, there is spaces in many societies to think of these kinds of alternatives, but it's going to have to take a lot of radical energy. And many women are exhausted because we're trying to, just breathe and then survive. And so to imagine finding alternatives to create new forms of society is going to take a lot. It's really going to take a lot.
That's part of the question. That it looks like it's going to take a while, and it's going to take so much from women. It's really, I cannot see the fight, against sexual and gender-based violence going. It has to be tough. Women have to really, really get ready to fight the patriarchal structures, because men dominate literally everything, and you can't. It's difficult to fight the power that dominates everything. It's like you're going for a mission that you can't win. Let me just to explore other options. Let me go back to you, Dami. What role do you think social media, if it has any role, has to play in the fight against sexual violence and sexual and gender-based violence?
I think it plays a very significant role. From my experience, I think like a lot of the movements and things that I've started or I've been a part of have been on social media. They started on social media. I think that for some reason or the other, it does give us an opportunity to find our clan, find people who share our point of view, find women who are seeking the kind of freedom and liberation that we want for ourselves, and we build a community from there. So I think, of course, social media is very important. And I've found with the amount of time I've spent on social media, I've seen a very gradual change of mind. At some point, some of the things and conversations we're having, people looked at us like we were crazy for having those conversations. And now I see people repeating those words, and it's a very easy place for people to organize. But I think that it's very easy to fall into the illusion that because there's an organization that's happening on social media, that's sort of where it stops. And I also find that on social media, it's very, very easy for people to get, I don't think being radicalized is bad. I think it's very important, but I think that it's very easy for people to become dogmatic, because when you look at the nature of conversation social media allows us to have statements, and there is no further conversation. You have statements, and those statements can be reiterated into varying slogans, and before you know it, you have a dogmatic set of people, and there are no ideas that are born from genuine consciousness. And I think that that's one of the biggest motivators of change. So that is, it's very possible for that to happen on social media, where we see ourselves as not more than political apparatus, and it's very easy to forget the actual human lives behind the conversations. But that's why I think that a lot of what I do, aside from going and talking about these things online and pushing the conversation online, I think that having that space outside of the internet where you actually interact with these people, you actually converse with the everyday man and everyday woman, and you actually see those experiences, you remain grounded, and you don't leave necessarily maybe your echo chamber. But I think the echo chamber is also important. I think the clan, the sense of community that social media brings is important. It does further the conversation. It lets the conversation reach people who it wouldn't have normally reached. But like everything that has a good has its bad side. I think once we have that consciousness to remember to to tune out sometimes from what social media gives us into what happens in everyday life. I wouldn't call it real life. I'll call it the more physical world. I think that then we can really reach the full potential of what social media offers us regarding the conversation around sexual violence, because there are actual real people experiencing these real relationships that people have. There's psychological impacts of these relationships. There are so many things that are layered up until these conversations. Very easy online to have conversations about the patriarchy and have catchy slogans, but when it comes down to the lived experiences of how that applies, social media doesn't paint an adequate picture.
Right, I feel you. It's a slippery slope, so it has both the good and the bad sides. We just have to find a balance. Esther, to come to you, one of the things that studies have shown, especially in relation to gender-based violence, is that women often are abused by those who they know. So family members, neighbors, friends. It's hardly like a stranger. And the studies have shown this. And one of the reasons is because women are not financially independent enough to leave their abusers, especially when they're married. What are your thoughts on financial empowerment playing a huge role in stopping gender-based violence? Do you think that this is key? What are your thoughts generally?
It is key. It is very key because many of the women are helpless. They are not self-dependent on themselves. Most of them don't have another trait they are into. So a lot of men tend to use that as a yardstick to violate a lot of women and assault them and say, if I call her now and I just tell her one or two things or give her something, she will come to me. And that has been the major problem. Economic empowerment is key. If a woman is on her own and she has a source of living, no man will mess around with her or want to treat her bad. So because of that, we have a lot of a series of empowerment skill programs we have for sex workers, where we have founders come in and they teach them a lot of skills, and most of them are dependent on their own. And let me tell you, if a woman is economically dependent, she has the key to everything. She will hardly go out to do anything that will jeopardize her own self. And she will be less busy with family members helping her or putting food on her table. She's always up and on. That's economic empowerment for women is key, and we are still begging on founders to please come to the aid of NSWA and help us fund women so that they can be self-dependent on themselves, and risk of them going out and being assaulted will be reduced to the minimum. And again, there's another problem with women in this part of the world that we are in Nigeria. They can hardly speak out. You will have all the resources in place for them for those cases to be taken care of. And she will just come up tomorrow morning and tell you, I'm no more interested. And if you don't speak out, how do we bring gender-based violence to a zero level when you don't come out to speak out? I don't want what society will think about them. Society is going to say I'm rough. Society is going to say, what did I go to do there? I cannot come out again. And this has made those cases rise day by day. It is the very big problem that is making this gender-based violence not coming to zero level. If you come out and say yes, it really takes a lot of time to talk to some of them. Even when we took some cases to court and get to the court case, they will just call you and tell you, Madam, I'm no more interested. I don't want my family members to see me. This person is related to me. If I come out and speak, I will be killed. Because they don't have their own a trade. They don't have something they are doing for themselves, and it's really affecting. So empowerment for women is key, is the stronghold to reduce gender-based violence.
I think society owes it to women to create a safe environment for them to want to speak, because it's really hard for survivors.
It's really hard.
Yes, survivors of abuse.
There are so many cases. There are so many cases we have that have been swept under the mat because those people cannot come out and speak, and it's really very painful, you know. And you know that there are evidences to prove and make sure she gets justice, but she's not willing to come out to speak.
Right. As a way just to round up, because there's so much to talk about, we could go on and on. But I just want to, are you optimistic? Like when you think about the conversation around sexual and gender-based violence, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, do you think we would have scratched the surface? What do you think the conversation would be like then? Are you hopeful that it would have been really, really minimized?
Yes, it would have been really minimized because I can say gender-based violence cases like 5 to 10 years back are not what we are having now. And again, the social media too is helping. There are some cases, social media, they will come on social media and some right lawyers will pick it up, and before you know it, justice is served. So I have to believe that in 10 years' time, in 6 years' time from now, that gender-based violence in our country will be minimized with the way we are going. A lot of advocacy still needs to be done. Sensitization and human rights education is key.
Okay. Do you agree when you think about it 10 years from now? Do you see change? Are you optimistic? Are you hopeful?
I'm I would like to stay optimistic, but haven't witnessed similar things for the past 40 years, and an escalation of more gruesome forms of violence. I mean, things we had never imagined. From where I'm positioned, I find it very difficult to imagine a world where there would be no violence, especially sexual violence. I really find it very difficult. But I do find moments of dreaming about that world. But in reality, having witnessed, having survived, seeing many more women witnessing, children being killed, and men finding new ways in which they could, kill our bodies. And I say that because in the South African context, I mean, we are seeing now that what is happening is actually, it's a competition. Men are competing with each other on how else to violate a woman's body. So until they're done, and we don't know when they're going to be done, until they're done, I have very little hope. But I do dream of a better future.
It's exasperating, like thinking about what you're saying, really, because as far as I know, sexual and gender-based violence has been a thing. Growing up, it was the thing. It's still a thing now. So really, I share your thoughts. Like, I don't know, it's really hard to be hopeful, but I hope that 10 years from now, the conversation is different. I hope that we've moved on to something else that would better the fight against this form of violation. Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I don't have any more questions. If there's anything else anybody wants to say just to, end the conversation, that would be great, because there's just too much to talk about. We'll keep going if I'm allowed to. Dami, anyone else? Or should we should we wrap it up? Okay, I guess
think everybody has said a lot of really important things. The conversation, like you said, is a very long one. It's something that we can talk about in so many different ways with so many different perspectives. But I've learned quite a lot from the conversation. I know that sounds weird because it seems like these are conversations that we've had a lot, but hearing it in different ways does bring new perspectives and new things to think about.
Yeah, I think the key thing is to not give up. We can't afford to give up. This fight is something that is going to go on continuously. We can't afford to be. Yeah, it's the sad reality for women, unfortunately, but it is what it is. So thank you so much, everyone. I've really learned from all of you. I really appreciate you all speaking to me. This is a conversation that we can't be tired of. We have to continuously talk about it, fight sexual and gender-based violence in our own way. And you all are doing an amazing job at it. I'm so, grateful to her to be able to moderate this panel. Thank you all for the work that you do. You're all amazing. And let's not get tired. It's hard, but let's really not get tired. Thank you.
All right.
So yeah,
Thank you, Aisha.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you,
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Aisha.
Okay, sure.
Thank you, everybody.
This poem was commissioned by Poet in the City in response to Bahia Shahab's exhibition at the Corner of a Dream, and it's inspired by Mahmoud Darwish's poem, I Come From There. I come from a sea of grandmothers, mourning lives spent worrying about tomorrows that were never guaranteed, spent sweating over the smoke of faham, under a sun poking so sharply they never relaxed enough muscles to carry a throaty laugh. I come from an ocean of red, in the form of blood-streaking memories, where nostalgia is a slippery cliff you will always fall from, unprepared, never jump from, trustingly. I come from within a line, drawn in the sand from a boardroom, a coin toss of fate, where a gun to your head will still be labeled your fault, your choice. Why did you? Why didn't you? You. I come from a baby sister whose favorite word was no at 3 years old, 6, 20 years old, who, when tired of drawing inside the lines with her right hand, painted outside them with her left, whose silence was a measured observation, whose words were rarely spoken, dispersed with intention, whose refusal to comply choked her with tear gas, who took the Hippocratic oath and defied it only with empathy at her peds rounds, whose sisterhood is an action and whose inaction is a statement, who never fit a mold, and instead sculpted her own in abstract black butterflies and eyelashes. I come from a baby brother whose hairstyles were chosen from his high school's list of reasons for detention, whose music in the old Toyota landed him a night in jail, whose resistance was unnamed and unspoken, enacted in comedic skits in our living room, and yelled at the dusty Maidan outside school, outside our first home, second, third, fourth home, whose revolution was one of thought, loud enough to provoke his teacher's whip, who learned to count out loud in Arabic by the number of lashes to his skin, who hid a note in his shoe, chanted 1,000 steps at the Million March, his silent legacy, a dedication to Darfur and a farewell in one breath, a statement which 1 billion poems will never articulate. I come from where children are buried in their school uniforms, where school uniforms are military camo, where schools are militant, where children are never children, never allowed the luxury of a childhood where childhood is a luxury, where childhood is elitist and classist, where children are never children, never children. I come from where sabur, patience, is a word manipulated into compliance, a chorus of idioms passed down, jinnan ta'arfu, better a demon you know, except we know our demons, and even when assigned to us at birth, given to us as last names, eat with us, sleep with us, they are still demons. And what has quiet loyalty ever brought us, other than extinction? So the next poem that I want to read is called Untitled. And I wrote it when I was listening to Sir and Kaytranada's song Go DJ, and I was just contemplating on how linear our approach to defining genres is. He asked, "How do I love you?" I said, "Mesmerize me." More than this voice, how it moves forward while rotating along itself, an axis shooting for the stars. When they ask you R&B or rap, point to this and say soul. Say boxless, say limitless, say infinite expansion of binaries, say no. Melodies do not separate themselves into perpendicular vacuums. Say human hearts all beat, all have rhythm, all connect to the one thing I can't point at. I try and feebly say humanity, but I can't find proof. I try again and say spirit, but don't know how to name it. Some say love. I say never-ending quest for freedom. They ask me, "What's that?" I point again and say music.
Reba Mashile ba se kgodisa malekane. Mokibane wa monesa morale ngwana wa lepulana pula ha chabe. Everywhere you go, there are bones lining the bottom of the ocean floor. Twisted rope, rotting flesh, dead hope. Click, click, says the camera. You keep asking for more. Everywhere you go, bones like a fabric, they tie you into knots. Not love, you can't have it. You wear them like a cloak. Bones, my belonging, you love the grip of fear. Not love, you can't have it. Burnt bones fill the eyes. Minds of the children, you serve them hell as life ignite. Flames in the stitches, burnt bones on their knees, begging for forgiveness. Click, click, says the camera. This is survival. This is business. Bones queued up, single file, papers ready. Bones at the border. This is business. Money heavy. You love the taste of bullets. Minds of the children, you love the cut of borders like your own hands stitched them. You filthy little faggot, bones snapping in the mouth. You crazy black bitch, you chew the bones, you spit them out. Bones between books. Books become laws. Bones fill these streets, you chew them up, you spit them out. Bones of twisted ropes pulling millions to the shore. Bones breaking over me, you chew them up. you spit them out, and you keep asking for more. I believe the soul is crafted by this physical terrain, and every string remembers us. They call us by our names. I believe that we are fashioned by the fragile balance between love and pain. When your thread breaks, do you piece it together? Or do you fight change and remain the same? The threads that bind us to our dreams, the threads that lead us to our goals, the threads with which we weave our dreams, the threads that tie us to our fears, the needles that pierce our hearts with sorrow, the threads that link us to our pasts, the threads we climb to reach our futures, the threads we break in violent acts, the threads that bind us. When your thread breaks, do you piece it together? Or do you fight change and remain the same? We've come to the edge. Don't stare at the precipice too long. After all the bets are hedged, the future's fabric is formed by the hearts of the strong. The ledge is scary. Our legs are weary. And the fall to the bottom is long. How do you rise when you've never flown before? How do you believe in wings that are half formed? Quilted wings are made of discarded scraps. We sew the shards of forgotten memories into a mental map, one that disarms the limbs of envy every time it attacks, one that propels us into flying forward when the wind forces us back. We are heading towards the exploding star that heralds the end of days. We're shedding the traps of ill-fitting norms, experimenting with the lines formed when you break form. We have entered the time when work is love, and love is a product of play. These are the hours to reach for what is worth rising for. These are the hours when visions are made.
Welcome everybody to this totally exciting session on a feminist vision for Africa. My name is Jessica Horn. I am a Pan-African feminist with roots in Uganda, and I am so excited for this conversation because it hits on all of my passions: Africa, feminism, and also this question of our future. A vision is always about creating a new world, and of course that new world is something that we're walking into. And I've spent quite a bit of my life working on this question of how we imagine feminist futures, both using evidence, but also our fierce, wild, creative imagination. So I am absolutely excited to welcome the sisters who are going to be in this conversation with me today. They're sisters that I have walked with and worked with in many different ways across the years, because as we know, this vision that we're making is collective, and it's also made with these hands. So a warm introduction to all three of you, and to just begin with brief intros. So Leyla Hussein was recently awarded an OBE. She's a psychotherapist, and she specializes in supporting survivors of sexual abuse. She's been a very important voice in work on countering FGM. She set up the Dahlia Project, which is the UK's first specialist therapeutic service for FGM survivors. And at the moment, she's working on the Girl Generation. Part of the brief is which to create spaces to support emotional well-being for the activists who do this incredible work of challenging FGM in community, in policy, in law, etc. And she lectures and is published widely. Our next panelist is Bisi Adeleye-Fayemi. She is a feminist thinker, an activist, a writer. She's been critical in establishing two of the continent's important regional feminist organizations, Akina Mamawa Africa, which she led throughout the 1990s, where she also worked to establish the African Women's Leadership Institute, which trained many of us feminists that are working in the field today. And then also went on to co-found and to be the first executive director of the African Women's Development Fund, which is where I now work, which is the continent's first women's fund, shifting resources to women's rights activists across the continent. And also in her position as First Lady of Ekiti State in Nigeria, she took it upon herself to also work to ensure that the state legislation really pulled up in terms of compliance with principles around women's rights and human rights. So she was key in enacting the Gender-Based Violence Prohibition Law, Equal Opportunities Bill, and also an HIV anti-stigma bill. And this is some of the work we're going to be discussing as we talk. And finally, Kinna Likimani, who joins us from Ghana. She's on audio. And she's a feminist thinker and activist, one who is wildly and widely engaging in all the conversations that we have, a really critical voice, a member of Ghana's Women Manifesto Coalition, and she's also director of programs at Awhatorhe, which is a parliamentary monitoring organization based in Ghana. And during election years, she's also part of an initiative that gets young people to engage in questions of governance and the elections and ideas about political participation. She's a passionate advocate for African literature, a passionate one, and encourages both reading culture and critical engagement with literary production. And she's the founder and publisher of Unsonga Books as well. So welcome to all three of you sisters, and we're just going to jump right in. And really, I want to begin in the future, which is where we want to be, and to ask the question to each of you. If you imagine a feminist future, what does it look like? What are some of the things that are normal in that future for African women? What is the texture of it? What are some of the things that hold it together? What are some of the things that will be long past and long forgotten? I'm going to begin with Leyla.
So yeah, that question, actually, I was looking forward to hearing also what the other panelists have got had to say about it. In terms of how does the future of African feminists look like? One, obviously, we've always existed. I think people make it sound as if this is a new space. It hasn't been. It's always been there. But also, I think what I would like to see in that space is finally for us to be recognized in the barriers that we've broken down. I feel genuinely when we're talking about women's issues, girls' issues globally, African feminists have been at the forefront of it. We're not getting all the acknowledgement or the credibility for it. So I'm hoping that we are recognized globally in that space. So we've always existed. It's just we just need to get credited and acknowledged. So I guess that's what I would like to see in the future in terms of the African feminists.
Missy, so if we're standing in the future, what is the world that you see if we're standing in the future?
Okay, as I answer that question, let me take a step back to 25 years ago when some of us were at the Beijing conference. If not for COVID-19, we would have been celebrating Beijing plus 25 in so many different ways and in different places this year, 2020. So 25 years ago, some of us were envisioning the future as young African feminists, thinking there'll be a time when all the rights that we were looking for in terms of political participation, in terms of freedom from protection from violence, in terms of ensuring that our communities were at peace, that all those issues would have been resolved 10 to 20 years from 1995. This is the year 2020. And things seem to have gotten worse for us as African women. In spite of all the wonderful things that we've done, as Leyla has just said, we have been at the forefront of so many transformational changes. And it seems as if we take 5 steps forward and 10 back. However, being the eternally optimistic person that I am, because we wouldn't have come this far as a movement if we weren't optimists. We would all have just given up, thrown up our hands and called up somewhere, to go to sleep and not want to wake up again. But I think, years from now, I see a future, hopefully from the bottom of my heart, that is safe for African women and girls. I see a future in which African women can live their lives with choices, and choices that are safe for them, choices that are informed and that are not coerced. And I see African women, girls, men and boys living together with respect, with accountability to one another, without anyone having a sense of entitlement to a woman's body or to a woman's labor. I hope and I pray that the future ahead of us is one that is peaceful.
Thank you, Bisu. And to you, Kinna, voice from the future.
So I'm going to paraphrase my mother, the writer Matebeni, who has said that the current Ghana that we live in, and by extension Africa, is the sum total of the vision and the works of African and Ghanaian men. Which means that if we are to get to a better future for the entire continent, women have to play a far bigger role. In fact, it seems like it's up to us really to do what we can for the continent. But at the same time, as I always say, we are also not a utility. So every time we talk about the utilitarian way of bringing freedom to women, but in the future, I think I would want to see far greater freedoms, freedom of our body, that the body we come in is ours to express in whatever way we want to express, the freedom to use that body to love or not love whomever we want to love, and the freedom to actually have access to the kind of healthcare and services that make us healthy. And that also in the future, our labors are our own. So that this practice, this patriarchy that from age, let's say even 3 years old, girls are conscripted into laboring for families, and women for workplaces, for our country, that our labor is our own to determine who and what we want to apply that labor towards. And that we are no longer living in the neoliberal Africa, because all of this is also tied up in economics. So I think that's the future I want.
Thank you, Kinna, and to all of you. And as you were talking, you invoked the word freedom, freedom, freedom many times. And actually the image behind me is an image of a Zimbabwean liberation fighter called Freedom Nyamubaya, who said much, I think, in the spirit of what you've just invoked from Awhatorhe, which is that liberation is a man, because men indeed helped to bring us political liberation from colonization, but they didn't bring us freedom. And so she says, liberation is a man, but freedom is the woman. Now, I want us to have a little bit of a think about how we get there. And Bisi's already spoken a bit about the fact that, of course, we've been trying and that this work has, been happening over generations, but there was certainly a very big push in the 1990s to really set the stage for the policy frameworks that we have now, the financing, and some of the visions of how we're actually going to go about making large-scale structural change. And the experience of it has been choppy, but I'd say I don't think it's totally our fault. Because, of course, the forces against us are pretty strong and pretty organized and ridiculously well financed. However, I wanted us to really think about the future that's coming through. And I'm drawing a few statistics that are from the Futures Africa report that AWDF produced, which is really the first regional trends analysis, looking at what does the future look like for Africa in 2030, and then thinking about what does it mean for African women. So this is some of the things that kind of the statistics and data show. So one of the things is that Africans will be 1/5 of all of humanity. And that in that 1/5, 1/3 of those people are actually going to be under the age of 15. But that because, of course, we're living longer because of, some degree of access to better health, etc., we are actually going to have more old people as well, which means also more older women. We're also dealing with a shift in terms of where we live and how we work and earn our money and feed ourselves, because Africa is actually going to be a majority urban. At the moment, there's still very large populations that are rural, but actually we're very quickly shifting to urban reality. We also know that because of all of that, also in part, what's killing us or making us sick is changing. So we often think of Africa as a continent of infectious disease, but actually we're starting to have the shift towards cancers, towards diabetes, hypertension, and all these diseases that are related to food and our ability to access quality food, which we know is a structural political issue. And cancers which have very much affected the African feminist movement and our sisters within it. And also that really, even though a digital divide remains, we're on it, we're on tech. Almost every African will have access to a mobile phone. And as we already know, there are many sites of tech, absolute tech innovation in Africa already anyway. But so we're shifting in terms of what this continent is looking like and therefore women's realities in it. So I'm curious to hear from each of your perspectives. Bissi, you do tremendous amount of work around politics and leadership, organizations. Leyla, from the perspective of our bodies, mental health. Kinna, again, from this perspective of thinking about our engagement as people, as citizens, as people that produce and create in the world. How do you see us taking on these realities as we're grappling with what we're already dealing with? So I'm gonna start with Bissi.
If we look around us and we see what's been happening in different parts of the continent and other parts of the world as well with the COVID-19 response, more and more people are growing disillusioned with their political leaders. And the issue of trust in public figures, in those who are supposed to be making the right kinds of decisions for the betterment of their countries or their communities, that trust is being badly eroded. It's been an issue for some time, but the COVID-19 crisis has exacerbated it. And in my own opinion, what that means looking forward is the kind of leadership that is going to work well for us in the future will be the kind that is less focused on political leadership and more focused on leadership of people in their communities, and the kind of leadership that is inclusive, that brings in the voices of those who usually do not get heard. And that is essentially about women, women's agency, women's perspective, and also young people. You've just said in the future we're looking at, a majority of our populations are going to be young people. And so if that is the case, what are we doing now to ensure that we create spaces, we create opportunities for young people to lead, for young voices to be heard? If the average age of a political leader or head of state in Africa is 60 or 65, what does that mean for us going forward? So I think the face of leadership is going to have to change. The nature in which governance and democracy functions is going to have to change. It's going to have to be more inclusive. And we need to build more emphasis on people taking leadership over in certain issues, speaking from a position of knowledge, authority, and moral standing, and issues such as diseases, just have been spoken about, issues such as climate change, issues such as what the global economic frameworks should look like now for us as Africans. And it goes on from there. I would like to see a process of us building leadership from the ground up to equip ourselves to be able to face the challenges ahead of us, knowing that further down the line, we are going to need the voices and the agency of those who right now are not usually the kind of people around the table making decisions. And I like the fact that you said the future is going to be about older women. It's going to mean that women are going to hopefully get the respect they earn. They deserve, older women, that is, their wisdom, their knowledge, their experience, and what they bring to the table beyond the very narrow parameters within which leadership is being defined now on the basis of who is a big man, their ethnicity, their religion, the money they have to spend. Leadership in the future should be about what solutions people have to offer to enable the continent move forward, and to enable the voiceless have a voice.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for that, Bissi. Kinna, your views on this?
Mm-hmm. Well, the online space is vital. There's a statistics that is often quoted that more Africans than anywhere else in the world will access their internet on mobile devices than on computers. So people who look at trends in online engagement, we arrived at where like other countries were hoping to be. And access to online spaces is growing. However, for women, there's a flip side. Access to the internet is gendered. It has to do with power. It has to do with labor. It has to do with economics. It has to do with your government and what they believe about infrastructure. Access to internet is a very powerful thing. And to the extent that African women are the least powerful and girls, it's a big issue. So there's a lot of work that we have to do in bridging that, making sure that more African women come online, more information is particularly available in languages that are not the dominant colonial languages. These are all important. And we need to do, because what online enables is, you know, we really need to take African women and girls away from their families and put them in spaces where they are free to learn, they are free to engage, away from, you know, the family that messes up with their brains. And that's what online is good for. But a lot more work has to be done in harnessing the power of online and mobilizing people online, particularly in marshalling of resources. One of the things I would like to see is that, you know, I always say that it's one of the things that is hurting African feminism is that every Sunday or Friday, African women are donating to religious institutions that are actively engaged in stripping us of more power. So we have to find a way of connecting the work, the vital freedoms that feminism can give, and only feminism can give, to the purchasing power of African women. We have to find ways of funding our movements and marshalling resources, both financial, human, everything that we can do. And I think that we are lagging a little bit behind in that. And that has to do with sometimes the people, the historical area where feminists have capacity are largely offline. So we are talking, when BC is talking about older women, we desperately need to get our older feminists, our older practitioners to come online. It's one of my rallying cries, because we need to connect the communities of the older feminists with the younger feminists, the budding feminists. We need to, people, you see, feminism is a demonstration project. To the extent that people are coming online and the demonstration is missing, for a lot of younger women, particularly, or even newer feminists who are older, we need to connect the two. But the online space remains a vital area of growth for us, and we need to pay attention to it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Kinna. And of course, one of the things we know about online space is that it often mirrors the dynamics of offline. And one of those really is the rise of violence against women online. And that's, I know, an issue that, Leyla, you work on a lot. Yeah, but I'm curious to hear from you about your sense of this future we're heading into and what you see as critical to think about as we do so.
Yeah, and I think Biffy and Tina made it very clear in terms of, you know, what needs to happen. But for me, fundamentally, it comes back to how safe those spaces are. Because fundamentally, we can have great leadership, we can have all the right women in that space. But how safe is it? And unfortunately, over and over again, especially Black women, African women, the space that they function, they're not physically safe, they're not socially safe, they're not emotionally safe. So for me, that's really critical. It's very key. And I've had this conversation, you know, people like Lola and other, you know, those who create spaces for us as feminists, to start building not just policies around how you keep those spaces safe, but actually actively part of creating that space. So for me, that's really quite critical in terms of, you know, we can have all the greatest ideas and all the right people, but if people can't actually express what they're feeling or how they want to approach it, or they can't even come present as themselves, you know, that's quite impossible. And Kinna, you know, you pointed out, you expressed a really good point there in terms of our girls don't even have, they're so conditioned into a way of thinking. And it's quite heartbreaking sometimes when you're in spaces and you know, and you hear, you know, very intelligent African women who are still embedded with this patriarchal system. So, and unfortunately, sometimes what happens, they come to these spaces, but there isn't there is an environment for them to even have that conversation. So for me, creating safe space I don't want to use the word empowering, because this is something that my daughter challenged me on recently, where I said to her, I've empowered you. And she said, oh, I didn't realize you empowered me. She goes, I thought I was born with my powers. It's society that strips away the powers. And sometimes what happens in these spaces, we are there to empower. Actually, no, we're there to remind. Especially, I want to say, we keep saying young leaders, but I want to emphasize on young female leaders. I think it's reminding them that, they actually were born with these powers, but in order to do that, we have to create these safe spaces. It has to be extremely safe, where they can come as themselves, not something that their family or the society has created.
Thank you. And safety seems to be coming up a lot, actually, as a concept, because of course patriarchy creates a world that's incredibly unsafe for us in so many ways. So just two more questions, really. Now, I want us to get a little bit into the detail, and for each of you to share an example, because of course paths are made by walking, and the truth is all three of you here have walked the path. And that you are involved in some incredibly interesting African feminist work to help shape this world we want to see and to create this feminist vision. So for each of you to just offer a very brief example of something you find totally exciting when it comes to this kind of feminist praxis on the African continent. So I'll begin with Kinna.
Yeah, I want to say two main things. I'm very excited about the queer spaces that are existing and are being created, particularly within African feminist spaces, and also then the queer literature. So we have queer feminist literature. Drama queens just did Moon Girls. So that's very exciting, because it's exactly the kind of thing that online should enable. It circumvents all sorts of gatekeeping and makes possible a certain vision. And even it's just exciting. So I'm very, very, very excited about that. I'm also back in the online space. We've had a young feminist movement called Pepe Dems in Ghana. And that has been, they have their issues. We all have issues, but that has been exciting to even see. They just use a very basic narrative. They just flip scripts. And the kind of rise they got out of the entire community online in Ghana has been good. And for me, I always say that young African women are facing a kind of patriarchy that I never faced in my 20s. I mean, it's scary for me. So the solutions in how they live their lives is actually going to they are the ones navigating. So that has been exciting. It's really exciting to see young feminists leading the way in all sorts of areas on the continent. So I like that. And I mean, I'm a literature person, so I will always default to art. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. And again, the truth is that the future, we always have this myth that the future moves us forward. But actually, as you're saying, there are moments in African past that have been way more progressive than what we're dealing with now, particularly because of the impact of religious fundamentalisms and their patriarchy. So thank you for that reminder. Bissy, in terms of beautiful practice.
Well, at the risk of sounding partial, I'm extremely proud of the work that the African Women's Development Fund has managed to do over the past 20 years.
Yes.
Being able to reframe conversations around resources and, talking about money in very serious terms as a strong political tool that can be used to build movements, that can be used to bring, to convene voices, and to provide space to those who otherwise would still be on the margins. So I'm really, really proud and happy about that. So to all my sisters at the African Women's Development Fund, I love you all. And if I die, which shouldn't be anytime soon, I would want somewhere on my epitaph, I'd want AWDF to feature somewhere on my epitaph. Then the other thing I'm excited about is the new ways in which we can use online technology, just as Kinna has just said, for mobilizing for advocacy and to support movement building. Right now in Nigeria, we are actively involved in work around sexual violence. And online organizing has been a tool that we've used to both old and young to mobilize and get a whole lot of things done. And one of the concrete products out of that has been getting our federal government and our state governors to agree to declare a state of emergency on gender-based violence. And the implication of that is there will be accelerated action, well, hopefully, and stronger political will on all these issues so that grassroots feminists in the country can get better support for their work. So I'm really happy about those developments.
Brilliant, thank you, Bisi. And to you, Leyla.
Yeah, I mean, I'm extremely excited about, especially in the African feminist movement, in terms of recognizing mental health and healing as one of our really big priorities. And actually, what's been interesting during COVID-19, it's women who run big organizations like Girls Not Brides, who's a Kenyan woman, and She Decides, run by another Kenyan woman, you know, contacted me to help develop the emotional well-being for their staff and those that they work with. So, you know, the fact that we are proactively taking care of ourselves emotionally. So it seems like there's a big movement of not just mental, emotional well-being, but spiritual well-being. I think it's not, you know, people can practice whatever religion they want, but I think as Africa, you know, it is celebrating the African spiritual side, which has now become another movement itself. But the one I'm really extremely excited about, it's the sexual freedom for women's movement. There's a big movement around African women in terms of being sexually free and actually recognizing that actually as African people, traditionally we were a sexual free society, and that it seems like we're reclaiming that again and again. It's led by women. That space is also led by women, and the allyship. And I used an example of, you know, spaces like Ake or Kaduna or other festivals, you know, like the organization that I mentioned. So that allyship, it's really, really also something I'm really extremely excited about.
Thank you. So, I mean, as we can see, from politics to the creative space to tech to reclaiming our bodies to the economy, African women are organized and working really actively on the solutions. And as we're saying, on both resisting the bad, but also really building this transformative vision of what we want. So to end, I just would love to end with an invocation, since again, it's visioning, process, and as Bisi had already said, actually at the start, this wish for a better future. So I'd like to end with each of your invocations for it. Just a brief phrase in terms of your hope, what you would like this future to be. So if we can begin with Bisi, and then Kinna, and then Leyla.
I would like the future to be a place where my children are safe, particularly the girls. I would love for them to be safe, to be heard, and to have choices.
So I'm going to be, one of the things I always say is that the talk about the future can be a con in and of itself. So I want to say that there are certain things about the future I want to see that are happening now, and you know, I want to back what Bisi said about AWDF. They've been so successful that we think they are the wallpaper, but I back everything, and I'm glad Lola is here because the sort of things we envision in the future, people like Lola make possible in terms of Ake and Kabafest and the conversations. So I suppose what I want to say is that we have great leadership and great initiatives, and African women are doing the most exciting things on this continent. Now, we just have to support each other and just expand the vision. That's all, and the work. Thank you.
Yeah, just echoing from what Bisi and Kinna are saying, I think it's just building these spaces. It's really exciting, even through the most difficult times in the world. I feel like African women, African feminists are again at the forefront. Let's continue. But I guess maybe one thing to add is it needs to be resourced well, because sometimes this feels like people treat us as if it's just a side project. These spaces need to be funded well. It needs to be resourced well for us to develop it better and invest in it. Yeah.
Great. So for safety, for expansion of the brilliance that we're already seeding, for resources. And I absolutely invoke the desire for recognition, for full citation of African feminist thinking and practice everywhere, for its visionary nature, for the opportunity for a radical politics of belonging and a complete redefinition of the ways that we're relating, so that we all are able to live in this way, nourished, agented, and with full choice. So I'd like to thank each of you for giving up your energy and your time, and to thank WOW also for the space that we have here, to be able to foreground the incredible work that's being done on the African continent. And again, the three sisters here have shared a bit of their work, but definitely do go and check out more of what's going on, some of the organizations they mentioned, their own initiatives, yeah, join in. Solidarity is the most beautiful thing. Thank you to all of you.
My name is Wana from Nigeria, and I'll be sharing some poems with you today. Inside the home our parents once shared is a stairwell. Inside the stairwell is a portrait. Inside the portrait is our family. My mother is sat back straight, clad in her double wrapper and red blouse. Gele sits on her head like a crown. Left hand is perched on her thigh, ring finger gleaming into the frame. My father is next to her. His grin is wide. My siblings, a halo around me. This photograph is perfection. I recall how we would alternate days between play wrestling and my mother's screams leaking through the keyhole of our parents' bedroom. As children, we learned very quickly to choose pain over disgrace. So my brother would throw his comic book to the side and muzzle my mouth shut as the words "leave my mummy alone" would eat through the spaces between his fingers. They said our parents were going through a midlife crisis, but nobody told us that we would be left in a bloodbath. 25 years later, inside the same home our parents once shared, this photograph still lines the stairwell where I once saw my mother rolling down like tumbleweed. The memory of our echoing living room betraying my 8-year-old voice still refuses to leave me. My brothers and I exchange childhood stories like we were war veterans, and I knew what it was to be on the front lines even before I got my first training bra. They said the women in our family were masterful at swallowing pain and keeping smiling photographs. I wish somebody had told them that neither their piety nor a portrait could save a family. At the dinner table, I asked my mother why she never took the portrait down, and she tells me in our language, "Ai boke, so they don't say I was impregnated by the ground." We were girls once, before our fathers were the first men to turn our hearts into pieces of splintered glass, before he left us, before he never came for us, before our uncles touched us, before the first time we said no, before the boys that pinned our bodies to the ground, before our skins were marked, you were a girl once. Before you learned to chew your tongue as your first solid meal, before you swallowed your voice, before anhedonia robbed you of breath, before joy curdled inside your belly, before unrequited love, before the love that never stayed, before you stayed, before God told you to submit, before loneliness dragged itself across your chest to sit in your lungs, before the light went out in your eyes, before you mapped your way in the dark, before you learned to walk twice. I was a girl once. When I was a little girl, my mother would mix a bucket of dough into the night. Now rising to twice the size of her forgotten dreams, she would squeeze each ball into the searing heat, because this was what it took to put clothes on our backs and books in our bags. You see, my mother would never let her children out with an empty stomach. I'm a woman now, and I know that I am my mother's daughter, learning courage through her blistered hands and knowing fearlessness in the lines of her smiling face. Sometimes we barter in silence like people do secret handshakes. She recalls the woman who hawked the clothes of her back to keep me here, and I recall the little girl trapped between a shop floor and a tuition payment, too far away from home to know if I would ever make it. But somewhere between our silence and the humming generator, my mother whispers, "We made it." And she would tell me, when the pain gets too heavy, open your mouth and spit it out. You must never chew. You must never swallow, because nobody will come for you when you're writhing in pain from a belly swollen with anguish. Nobody will come for you when you silently scream in a stillbirth. My dear, there is no consolation for long suffering, she would say. So when the pain gets too heavy, make sure you open your mouth and spit it out.
That if it gets too hard, I can off myself. You see, I convinced myself that writing suicide notes ain't a cry for help. But then, here's the thing about having a smartphone. It comes with the illusion that there are people around you. So if people need people and people aren't there, we live with the illusion that the strangers care. There's a high that you finally hit. When you're looking at the world like there's something you missed, you live free from expectations, but you're still that little girl trying to find that peace. It's been a few days, and now I'm 23. I spent almost 2 decades trying to be free. See, voices make you angry when they're coming from the streets, but the ones that drive you mad are the ones from within. It's been a few days, and now I'm 23. I spent almost 2 decades trying to be free. Voices make you angry when they're coming from the streets, but the ones that drive you mad are the ones from within. Are the ones from within. The ones that drive you mad are the ones from within. The ones from within. The ones that drive you mad are the ones from within. I've been rowing this boat since I was in grade 3. It's hard to row gently on stormy seas, and everybody says take a break, but no one ever sees the storm around me. I've been trying my best not to make a scene. I wear a broken smile for friends and family, but I think I broke my battle. Now I have no choice. I'm gonna hit the water, though I can't swim.
I've been rowing this boat since I was in grade 3. It's hard to row gently on stormy seas, and everybody says just take a break, but no one ever sees the storm around me. I've been trying my best not to make a scene. I wear a broken smile for friends and family, but I think I broke my paddle. Now I have no choice. I'm gonna hit the water, although I can't swim. I'll wait in the water, let the spirits guide me home. I'll wait in the water, let the water cleanse my soul. Darling, I'll wait in the water as the angels come to get me. I'll wait in the water just to be free. Oh, wait in the water, let the spirits guide me home. Oh, wait in the water, darling, let the water cleanse my soul. Oh, wait in the water as the angels come to get me. Away in the water just to be free. Oh, mi nira mbe ninu odo Eledumare retí mi o. Kàkà kí n dẹrù máyà rẹ ilé mi o. Elédùmarè àánú ẹkún mi o. I'll wait in the water just to be free. Òmìnira ló ń bẹ nínú odò. Ṣẹ́rí Elédùmarè àánú ẹkún mi o. Kàkà kí n má dẹrù máyà rẹ ilé mi o. Elédùmarè àánú ẹkún mi o. I said I'll wait in the water just to be free. Darling, I'll wait in the water just to be free. Elédùmarè o, ọ̀kan ṣoṣo àyàbá tí mi gbọ́ kìjikìji. Alẹ́ ní mọ̀ ògo ẹni kò mọ̀. Ẹni mọ̀ ògo ẹni kò mọ̀. Mo ní sí àgìrì làgìrì ọ̀làgìrì kàkàkà tí ń bẹ́nu àwọn ọ̀run. Oh, I'll wait in the water. I've been waiting in the water all my life. Oh, I'll wait in the water to be free. Ani bang bok bekele bekele. Bang bok bekele bekele. Am I a son to am I a soci? Ilé olówó ń gbà lọ. Ogun mélòó ló tójú rẹ̀ jà o? Ogun àdùn bí ó tójú èmi jà. Ogun ìjàmọ́ ó tójú mi jà. Ogun àdùn bí ó lè lọ́pọ̀lọpọ̀. Ọmọ mi ń ké lọ bí ewúrẹ́. Ìyàwó mi ń bẹ lọ bí ìgalà. Èmi náà ń fò lọ bí àparò.
for so many battles.
Hello, and thanks to everyone who's been watching the Africa program at WOW Global 24. We'd like to say thanks to the WOW Foundation for bringing the festival together, and to their global founding partner Bloomberg and global partner MasterCard for making the foundation's work possible.